The pen felt heavier than it should have, not in weight, but in consequence. Its tip hovered above the signature line like it knew what it meant, what it would unravel, what it would finalize. My name, written in blue ink, would be the closing bell on a war I never wanted to fight, but one I'd been drafted into years ago. I sat at the kitchen table, the old oak legs creaking beneath me, familiar and weary like the woman perched above them. The house was quiet in that haunted way, where silence feels like it has eyes. It wasn't the cozy kind of quiet. It was the kind that hangs in rooms too used to shouting and sighs. Outside, Oregon's gray skies pressed against the windows like a memory. Inside, everything felt pale. Walls the color of stale parchment, air thick with old dinners and unspoken regrets. Then came his voice, drifting in from the hallway. "You always do this, Mom. Make something out of nothing, just let it go." Dismissive, derisive. And then the sound I'd come to know too well, that roll of the eyes, not just visible, but audible in its contempt. He didn't even wait for my response. Ethan turned on his heel, the echo of his boots clapping across the hardwood as he made his way to the front door. I didn't follow him. Instead, I looked down at the document again. The revised will. I wasn't angry, not anymore. That left me years ago. What was left was something colder, more final, like frost that never thawed. The kettle on the stove let out a low sigh, boiling but forgotten. I turned it off with a flick of my wrist and reached for the pen. My hand was steady. Claire Ann Delaney. There. Signed. Years of pain distilled into one deliberate motion. I slid the papers into the manila folder, sealing it like I was closing a wound. The new will named my daughter Emily as sole heir. She wouldn't expect it. She never asked for it. But she saw me. Ethan had stopped seeing me a long time ago, if he ever truly had. I stood up slowly, joints aching from too many years of standing still in my own life. I carried the folder down the hall to the office, a room my husband once called his thinking space, though most of the time he used it to escape us. The safe was tucked behind a false panel in the closet. Code still the same. His birthday, not mine. A detail that once felt sweet, now bitter. As the safe door swung open, I stared at its contents. Old passports, birth certificates, a few photos I couldn't bring myself to look at. And now, the will. It slid in easily, a perfect fit. I shut the safe, spun the dial, back into silence. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon from the bread I baked that morning. Ethan didn't eat any. Too many carbs, he said, always watching his weight, always watching me. Every bite I took was an invitation for judgment. He never raised a hand, not once. But that was the trick of it. Emotional abuse never leaves bruises you can show to friends. It whispers, it wears, it weaves itself into the fabric of your days until you can't tell where you end and the damage begins. He learned it from his father, and I taught him to accept it by surviving it. That was my sin. When he rolled his eyes today, it wasn't just disrespect. It was the full-bodied contempt of a man who saw his mother as a fixture, not a person. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said when I suggested he speak more gently to his wife. I watched her flinch across the room. I remembered that flinch. It's muscle memory after a while. And just like that, I saw the loop close, one generation feeding the next, hurt handed down like an heirloom. But I wouldn't let it go further, not with my name on it, not with my silence. The house ticked and breathed like it always had, unaware of the shift. Or maybe it knew. Maybe houses absorb more than we realize. The walls had seen too much to remain neutral. The photographs along the staircase stared down at me in my 30s, holding a baby Ethan. My smile looked real back then. I couldn't tell if it was or if I'd just gotten good at pretending early on. There were no pictures of Emily past the age of 10 on those walls. Not because I loved her less, but because she stayed soft, gentle. I didn't want to immortalize her innocence in a house where it would rot. I walked up the stairs slowly, pausing at the top to listen. Nothing. Just the echo of a man who thought the world owed him something, walking away from the woman who gave him everything. Downstairs, the safe was locked. The will was sealed. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't at peace either, but I was certain, and sometimes that's enough. He was 7 when I first realized something was wrong. Not broken, not damaged, just tilted. Like a picture frame that never sat quite level no matter how many times you adjusted it. Back then, Ethan had this golden charm about him, the kind that made teachers fawn and neighbors laugh. People adored him, thought he was sharp, quick-witted. They'd watch him with wide smiles and say, "What a clever boy." And I'd smile back, even when I felt something cold unfurling in the space between his affection and his eyes. He never cried when he scraped his knee, never clung to my leg the way Emily did. If he was upset, he'd go quiet. Not in sadness, but in calculation. He learned early that affection could be currency. That obedience wasn't necessary if you could entertain people instead. One afternoon, I was folding laundry when I heard him tease Emily. She was 4. Her chubby fingers gripped a crayon, her cheeks flushed with effort as she drew some wild, happy thing. He walked by and muttered just loud enough, "That looks dumb." She didn't say anything, just lowered her crayon. I walked in and asked why he said it, and he shrugged, eyes wide and innocent. "I didn't mean it. She's just too sensitive." That was the first time. There were more. Nathan, my husband, wasn't much help. He was a good provider, which in his mind made him a good man. That's what his father taught him. Bring home the money, fix the sink, mow the lawn, and you've fulfilled your role. Everything else? Women's work. He was emotionally present the way a storm cloud is, always looming, rarely opening. He loved Ethan. He admired Ethan. And why wouldn't he? Ethan mirrored him perfectly, their silences, their superiority, their inability to process emotion without disdain. When Ethan snapped at me, Nathan chuckled. "He's just like me." Like it was something to be proud of. If I pushed back on either of them, I became the difficult one. I was overreacting, too sensitive, hysterical. That word was his favorite when we argued. "You sound hysterical, Claire. You need to calm down." Eventually, I stopped trying to explain myself. Emily was different. She watched, she absorbed. At age 5, she could read my moods better than her father ever could. She was the one who tiptoed into the kitchen when I stood at the sink too long, staring at nothing. She'd wrap her arms around my waist and say nothing at all. Sometimes I'd look down at her and wonder how someone so young could understand grief that wasn't even hers. She was gentle, and in our house that meant invisible. Ethan took up all the space, his science fairs, his debates, his soccer games. Emily's art shows were missed, her piano recitals attended with one foot out the door. She never complained, she just faded back like wallpaper. I told myself I was doing my best. I told myself it would balance out someday, that Ethan would grow out of it, that Nathan would come around, that if I kept the peace, the pieces would somehow arrange themselves into something whole. But peace in our house was just silence worn thin. I remember one evening, Ethan was 13. We were eating dinner. I had cooked his favorite, lasagna, garlic bread, a Caesar salad without croutons because he didn't like the texture. Midway through the meal, I mentioned something about his grades slipping in English. He put his fork down, looked right at me. "If you were smarter, maybe I'd care more about books." Nathan didn't say a word. He just kept eating. I waited. I waited for him to correct our son, to reprimand him, to defend me. Nothing. The silence was worse than the insult. Afterward, when I tried to bring it up, Nathan just waved it off. He's a teenage boy. He doesn't mean half of what he says. But Ethan always meant it. Every word. He was testing boundaries. And we kept showing him there were none. At church, people would compliment us. "Beautiful family," they'd say. Nathan would smile. Ethan would beam. And I'd stand there, nodding, pretending I wasn't slowly disappearing behind the illusion. I used to defend them both. To friends. To my sister. Even to myself. They're just under a lot of pressure. Boys are like that. It's not abuse. It's just the way they were raised. I told those lies so often I forgot they were lies. I was surviving inside the structure of traditional womanhood. Sacrifice, silence, service. And like all cages, this one was built from love and duty and reinforced by fear. Emily once asked me why I never argued back. Because it doesn't change anything, I told her. She didn't look satisfied with that answer. She was 17 by then. She was already dreaming of college, of escape. She didn't say it, but I knew she feared turning into me. And in her shoes, I would have too. 25 years. That's how long it took for the cracks to become canyons, for the distance between Ethan and me to stretch so far that we stopped even pretending to meet in the middle. His contempt matured. 25 years. That's how long it took for the cracks to become canyons, for the distance between Ethan and me to stretch so far that we stopped even pretending to meet in the middle. His contempt matured. It became smoother, more sophisticated. He didn't shout. He patronized. He didn't dismiss. He dissected. At family events, he made jokes at my expense. At holidays, he brought wine but no warmth. He'd correct my stories, challenge my facts, smirk when I lost my place in conversation. I'd sit across from him at the table and wonder how this man had once lived in my womb. He loved being right, more than he loved being kind. And I was tired of bleeding from paper cuts. Present day. The phone rang just after lunch. The number was unfamiliar, but I recognized the area code, Nathan's old firm. Mrs. Delaney? The man asked. Yes. I'm calling in regard to your late husband's estate. There's been a discovery. My stomach sank. He went on to explain that during the process of digitizing old records, a clerk had found an unsigned but notarized draft of Nathan's original will, written a year before his death. It contained a clause, one that directly contradicted what I had been told after his passing. In this clause, Ethan was named executor, not beneficiary, executor, with full discretion over the distribution of assets. The firm had assumed it was outdated since it wasn't the final signed copy, but legal gray areas are tricky, and the clause could be used to contest my revised will, especially if Ethan chose to pursue it. I hung up and stood in the middle of my kitchen, trying to remember how to breathe. Of course he left Ethan power. Of course he did. Even in death, Nathan found a way to tip the scales toward control. And now, the son I had just disinherited might have the legal leverage to unravel everything. The distance between us had never felt so lethal. The walls of our first home were butter yellow when we moved in. I painted them myself. Second-hand overalls, a borrowed ladder, tiny splashes on my arms like freckles. It was the only room I touched, the nursery. I remember thinking if I could get that one room right, maybe everything else would fall into place. It didn't. By the time Ethan was 2, the paint had started to flake. A fine line above the crib where the steam from the old radiator warped it. The wallpaper in the hallway started to peel next. The floors creaked so loudly at night, I learned which boards to step over so I wouldn't wake anyone, so I wouldn't be noticed at all. That house held more than our belongings. It held our silence. Nathan worked late, always. He claimed it was for us, but I knew better. I used to count the hours after sunset, how long he'd be gone, how long I'd be alone with the baby and my own unraveling thoughts. When he was home, he was there in body, not in spirit. He'd open the fridge, complain we were out of something, then retreat to his den with a drink and the TV. Sometimes I'd sit on the couch with Ethan in my lap, his tiny hand patting my arm like a drum, and I'd wonder how long until that affection turned into apathy. One night, I must have been 29, I brought up the idea of finishing my degree. I had dropped out when I got pregnant, always telling myself I'd go back. I could do evening classes, I said, just 1 or 2 to start. Nathan didn't even look up from his paper. Why? You want to play student now? I tried to explain, the need to use my brain again, to feel like more than a housemaid. He laughed. You've got a full-time job here already, Claire. You think a diploma's going to make you smarter? I should have known then that it wasn't a partnership, it was possession, but I laughed with him, because the alternative was too painful to name. When Ethan was 5, he started copying Nathan's phrases. Don't be so dramatic. Mom, you're overthinking it. Why do you always make things worse? They came out of his tiny mouth in Nathan's tone. And every time they did, I felt a small fracture open up in me. One morning, Ethan spilled orange juice on the rug and blamed it on Emily, who could barely walk. When I confronted him, he crossed his arms and said, "She's not smart enough to know what happened." I remember kneeling beside him, trying to explain kindness, truth, fairness. He just stared past me, like I was background noise. Nathan walked by mid-conversation, tousled Ethan's hair, and said, "That's my boy." That night, I cried in the bathtub for over an hour. I kept a journal then, hidden in the closet behind a stack of blankets. I wrote in it only when the house was asleep. I filled it with truths I couldn't say out loud. I feel invisible. I think he hates me. I don't know who I am anymore. Some nights I wrote entire pages without punctuation, just thoughts crashing over one another, breathless and desperate. It was the only place where I could be honest. Once Nathan found one of the pages I left on the counter by mistake. "What's this?" he said, reading aloud with that mocking lilt. I snatched it back, red-faced. "Just venting," he smirked. "No one likes a martyr, Claire." After that, I switched to writing in shorthand. I didn't even trust my own handwriting in that house. Emily was born on a rainy Tuesday. She came into the world quietly, unlike her brother. Her eyes opened right away, wide, curious. She never cried much. She just watched. When she was 2, she'd crawl into my lap with a book and insist I read The Tree one. Shel Silverstein, that damn giving tree. I hated it, but I read it anyway. Because she liked how I made the leaves rustle with my voice. Those quiet moments, her head against my chest, my voice low and steady, were the only times I felt like I hadn't failed completely. Nature became my second sanctuary. On weekends, I'd take Emily to the park, leave Ethan with Nathan. He never noticed how often I left. I'd sit under a tree, sketching random patterns in my notebook, letting Emily chase squirrels and dandelions. Out there, I could breathe. But peace never lasted. The house always pulled me back in. Ethan was 12 when he started correcting my grammar at the dinner table. He was 14 when he called me ridiculous in front of his friends. He was 15 when he refused to eat anything I cooked unless it was exactly what he requested. His voice deepened, but his eyes stayed the same, cold, assessing, like he was always weighing me, measuring how little he could give and still get what he wanted. One night, he came home late. I asked where he'd been. "Out," he said. I pushed gently. "With who?" "God, you're so paranoid." Then he turned to Nathan. "Is this what you deal with all the time?" Nathan just shook his head, didn't even look at me. That was the night I packed a bag. I got as far as the front porch before Emily woke up and cried for me. Her voice cut through the night like a flare. I unpacked the bag before sunrise. Looking back, I wonder if I stayed out of love or obligation, or fear, or all of it tangled into a knot I didn't have the strength to untie. They say motherhood is sacrifice, but no one tells you that sacrifice can become self-erasure. There was a vent in the hallway upstairs that always whistled in winter. I'd hear it late at night when the rest of the house was quiet, a high-pitched moan that felt like it came from the bones of the house itself. Sometimes I imagined it was the house crying with me, that it, too, was tired of pretending everything was fine. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still hear it, that mournful hum echoing through the walls like a secret I never got to tell. The roast chicken was overcooked. I could tell by the way the knife dragged against it, resisting just slightly more than it should. The skin, too crisp, cracked in places like an old facade. But I didn't care. I wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. The table was set for 4, white plates, cloth napkins, the heavy silverware Nathan insisted we keep after the wedding. Emily offered to bring wine. Ethan brought his appetite and a storm cloud. The clinking started early. Forks against plates, glasses against wood, words against flesh. "So," Ethan said, sipping his Pinot like a king surveying peasants, "I hear you've been rewriting your legacy, Mom." Emily stiffened beside me. Her eyes dropped to her plate. She hadn't touched her potatoes. I tried to keep my voice steady. "I updated my will. That's not a crime." He smirked. "Of course not, but it is revealing." The room contracted around us. The air thickened. I saw it then. The same look Nathan used to wear, resurrected in our son's face. That amused, patronizing detachment. Emily looked up. "Can we not do this?" Ethan ignored her. "I just think it's interesting. He continued, how suddenly you're taking a stand, after decades of letting everyone walk all over you. I placed my fork down slowly. That's not true. He leaned back in his chair, wine glass poised like a weapon. Isn't it? The conversation splintered after that. He made jabs about my memory, my emotional fragility, my tendency to rewrite history. He spun our past into a story where he was the burdened child, and I was the suffocating, hysterical mother. I mean, you cried in the laundry room a lot. That's not really a parenting strategy, is it? He said it with a laugh, but there was no joy in it, just venom wrapped in velvet. Emily spoke up once, quietly. She was under a lot of pressure. Ethan snorted. Oh, please. She chose her life. No one forced her to marry Dad. No one forced her to stay. And just like that, the last thread snapped. I stood up slowly. My napkin fell to the floor, but I didn't pick it up. I stayed because I believed you both deserved stability, I said, my voice trembling. Because I thought if I just held it together long enough, something good would come out of all that pain. Ethan crossed his arms. So now you want a medal? For being miserable? I want acknowledgement, I said, louder now, for everything I gave up, for every time I bit my tongue, for the years I spent walking on eggshells so you and your father wouldn't turn on me. He rolled his eyes. That was it. That was the trigger. You always do that, I snapped, like my words are just noise, like I'm something you've outgrown. Emily reached out a hand toward me, but I couldn't stop. It was like a dam broke, and everything I'd swallowed came rushing out. You used to look at me with such contempt, even as a child. You learned it from your father, but you made it your own. You made me feel small in my own house, like I didn't matter, like I was a supporting character in a story about your brilliance. His mouth opened, but I cut him off. And you know what? I let you. I let you treat me like that because I thought it would make you love me. I thought if I kept giving, you'd finally see me. Emily whispered, Mom. But I wasn't finished. I'm done pretending I was the problem. I'm done being your doormat. And I'm done pretending we're family in any meaningful sense of the word. The silence afterward was bottomless. No one moved. The chandelier above us buzzed slightly, the only sound in the room. Ethan looked away first. Of course he did. Cowards never maintain eye contact when their masks slip. Emily reached for my hand under the table. This time, I let her hold it. That night, after the dishes were cleared and the remnants of that dinner sat cold and abandoned in the kitchen, I walked upstairs and retrieved the will from the safe. I didn't just change it. I rewrote it. Every clause, every line. It became a declaration, not a document. Ethan would get nothing. Not the house, not the money, not the narrative. 2 days later, Emily called me. Her voice was hesitant, but there was something else under it. Steel, maybe. Mom, I need to tell you something. I braced myself. I recorded the dinner. Silence on my end. I didn't plan to, but I'd been journaling a lot with audio lately. My phone was in my lap, and when things started to go sideways, I hit record. I closed my eyes. The room swayed slightly. You recorded that? Yes, she said. I want to post it. Online. Not the whole thing, just a section. The way he spoke to you, it wasn't okay. People need to hear this. My instinct was to say no, to protect him, to protect us from the scrutiny. But then I remembered his smirk, his words, the decades of silence I had cloaked around my shame like a second skin, and I remembered my own voice, finally rising. Do it, I said. Let them hear. The first time I realized my mother didn't know how to love me, I was 9 years old and sitting on the edge of her vanity bench, watching her paint her face in slow, deliberate strokes. She was beautiful in the way department store mannequins are, composed, unreachable. Her lipstick was always the same shade of red, her perfume sharp and citrusy. She never hugged me without checking first to see if I was clean. She brushed my hair every night, long strokes, careful, methodical. But she never smiled when she did it. She never said it was beautiful or asked how my day was. It was maintenance, a chore, like dusting furniture. My father wasn't cruel exactly, just absent. Even when he was home, he seemed far away. His words were sparse. usually instructions or corrections. You're not sitting straight. Speak up. Don't cry about nothing. I learned early that tears were private and comfort was internal. There was no room in our house for emotional mess. As I got older, I began to mimic her. The posture, the tight-lipped smiles, the habit of swallowing disappointment without complaint. When Nathan came into my life, I thought his confidence was strength. I mistook his dismissiveness for decisiveness, his detachment for maturity. I didn't recognize the pattern. I just stepped into it like it was home. The silence I grew up with became the silence I chose. And when it started to hurt, I told myself it was normal, that I could fix it, that this was love. It took years before I admitted to myself that I'd inherited more than my mother's hair color or my father's stiff jaw. I'd inherited their absence. I'd recreated their coldness in my own home. Not because I wanted to, but because it was the only language I knew. When Ethan began to parrot Nathan's tone, it triggered something. But it also validated the environment I had silently curated. The cycle didn't start with him. It started with me, and it started with her. I remember a moment burned in detail. I was 12, standing in the hallway before a school recital, dressed in a blue cotton dress with itchy lace sleeves. My mother stared at me for a beat too long, then said, "Try to smile more tonight. No one likes a moody girl." I nodded, of course. I always nodded. That night, I smiled until my cheeks hurt. And when the applause came, I told myself I had earned her love. But her face remained the same, neutral, unreadable. That's when I learned approval is not affection, and performing isn't belonging. In therapy, I told that story. I hadn't planned to. It just came out, like a splinter working itself to the surface. My therapist, a woman named Ruth with kind eyes and blunt edges, sat quietly after I finished. Then she said, "You weren't loved conditionally. You were tolerated transactionally." It hit like a hammer. I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend my mother. But I couldn't, not without lying. My journal became my mirror during those sessions. I wrote the truth I was afraid to speak aloud. I wrote, "I don't think I ever liked being a mother. I only liked the parts where I felt useful. And I've spent more time trying to be enough for other people than I've spent knowing myself." Some entries were just lists. Lists of the things I gave up. My degree, teaching, painting, friendships, my voice. I used to think love was measured in sacrifice. But Ruth said something else. Sacrifice without recognition is servitude. The day I truly understood, that was the day I rewrote the will. It wasn't spite. It wasn't revenge. It was self-definition. I sat at the desk Nathan once called his own, cleared away the dust, opened a new document, and began again, not just legally, but emotionally. I had coffee with an old friend that week, Deborah. We hadn't spoken in years. She used to work with me at the library before I left to have Ethan. She'd stayed, built a life of quiet, chosen solitude. No husband, no children, but peace in spades. She looked at me across the table and said, "I always wondered why you stayed with him. You had a spark, Claire, and you just went dim." I didn't cry. I nodded. I was waiting for someone to tell me I didn't have to. She smiled. "You just did." That night, I walked the perimeter of the house, touching the edges of things I once considered sacred. Wedding photo frames, Ethan's school certificates, Nathan's antique clock collection, none of them moved me. Then I walked into the guest room. Emily had stayed there after college, her old books still stacked on the shelves. I picked one up, an anthology of poetry she'd marked with sticky notes and highlighted passages. One line caught my eye. She drew a map from the ashes and called it her future. I wrote that down, and then I added it to the preamble of my new will. This time, it wasn't just about who got what. It was about legacy. Emily would inherit not just the house, but the story, the truth, the why behind my choices. I wrote a letter to her, tucked between the legal pages, explaining what I had learned too late. That inheritance isn't love, that silence isn't survival, that belonging must be chosen, not imposed. By the time I sealed the envelope and placed it back into the safe, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt whole. For the first time in my life, I wasn't editing myself to be palatable to someone else. I was writing the end of the story I never got to start. There are moments when I look at Ethan and try, desperately, to see my child. The boy who once clutched my finger with his whole hand, who used to run down the hallway giggling, his shoes slapping against the wood like joy in motion. But lately, all I see is Nathan. Not the man Nathan became near the end. Tired, sick, distant. But the man he was in his prime. Charismatic, commanding, cold. It's not just in Ethan's voice or the way he walks. It's in the tilt of his head when he's pretending to listen, the tight smile he gives when he knows he's hurt you but won't admit it. It's the precision with which he chooses his words, always calculated, always sharp. He inherited Nathan's tools, but he turned them into weapons. When Ethan was 9, I tried to teach him about kindness. We were volunteering at the local shelter, just the two of us. I thought, maybe if he saw people struggling, he'd develop empathy. I gave him juice boxes to hand out to the kids. He looked at them like they were beneath him. Later that night, I asked him what he thought. They smelled weird. He said, "Why don't their parents just get jobs?" I corrected him gently. Tried to explain generational poverty. He smirked. "You sound like one of those sad commercials." Nathan overheard us, didn't say a word, just nodded with a satisfied kind of pride. I tried again the following year. Ethan had a friend, Caleb, who came from a difficult home. Caleb started crying one afternoon during a playdate when a toy broke. Ethan rolled his eyes and said, "Stop being a baby." After Caleb left, I pulled Ethan aside. I told him that real strength meant knowing how to be gentle. He looked at me, all of 10 years old, and said, "Dad says crying is weakness." It was always like that. Every lesson I tried to teach him was undone by Nathan's unspoken code: dominate or disappear. Last week, I took off my wedding ring. I'd worn it like armor. Even after Nathan died, it stayed on my hand like a habit, like a lie I couldn't stop telling. It was just before bed. I held it between my fingers, looked at the engraving. "All my days, Nathan." I slipped it off slowly, feeling the faint ridge it had left in my skin after all those years. I didn't cry, I just felt unburdened. I left it in a small porcelain dish on my dresser. That night, I slept like a woman unclaimed. Ethan's charm had always been his shield. He knew how to say the right things to the right people. Teachers adored him, coaches respected him, strangers were drawn to him. But I saw behind the curtain. I saw how he changed faces depending on who was watching. He could be affectionate when it benefited him, apologetic when he wanted something, contrite just long enough to avoid consequences. When he was 17, he crashed my car. I was livid. He swore he was sorry, told me it was a wake-up call, promised to be more responsible. 2 weeks later, I found out he'd been racing it with his friends. When I confronted him, he shrugged. "You believed me because you wanted to." He said it with a grin. That was when I knew. My son was not just hurt or confused or angry, he was performing. He had learned from the best, his father, that love could be manufactured, that sincerity was just another tool in the belt of control. Yesterday, I opened the old family photo albums. They'd been gathering dust in the closet for years. I sat on the floor with them spread out like timelines. One for Ethan, one for Emily, one for vacations, birthdays, holidays. Smiles fixed in time, unaware of what lay ahead. I flipped through them slowly. Ethan's childhood face stared back at me, innocent, unaware, still unformed. But even in those early shots, I could see the shadows. The way he leaned toward Nathan in every photo. The way his arm always seemed just slightly closer to his father than to me. I set aside the photos that hurt the most, the ones that felt dishonest, ones where I was smiling but remember feeling hollow, ones where Ethan looked at me with that glazed-over gaze already starting to recede. I burned them in the fireplace, one by one. It felt like mourning, but also like truth. I didn't grieve the son I had. I grieved the son I hoped he'd be. The boy I used to imagine in those early days, before the silence took root, before the coldness calcified. A son who asked questions, who said thank you, who saw people as people, not stepping stones. But you can't parent potential. You can't love someone into becoming decent if they're not willing to meet you halfway. Ethan never met me halfway, not once. This morning I checked the mail and found a strange envelope, no return address. Just my name written in Nathan's slanted handwriting. Inside was a letter, postmarked 3 years ago. I sat at the kitchen table and unfolded it with hands I didn't know were shaking. It was dated shortly after one of Ethan's visits, one of the rare times he'd come home and managed to turn a weekend into a battlefield. The letter read, Claire, I know you think I'm blind to Ethan, but I see him. I see the cruelty he hides behind his charm. I see how he talks to you. I don't know how we created this. I don't know if it's my fault or just the way the world hardened him. But I fear him, Claire. Not physically, psychologically. I see something in him I can't name, but I know it's dangerous. He doesn't care about anyone the way people should. I should have told you this years ago. I just didn't know how. Forgive me. Nathan. I read it 3 times. The fourth time, I wept. Not for Nathan, not even for Ethan. But for all the years I let myself carry their silence when even they knew the truth. The safe opened with a metallic groan, reluctant, like it knew what was coming. I knelt on the carpet in Nathan's old office, the carpet matted in the corners from years of use and neglect. The room smelled faintly of dust and something sharper, like old paper left too long in the dark. I turned the dial one last time, pulled open the door, and exhaled. Inside was more than I remembered. Not just the revised will, still sealed and tucked neatly into its folder. There were envelopes, yellowing, brittle, some addressed to me, some never opened. Stacks of financial records, Nathan's notebooks, loose photographs, and one of my old journals I'd thought long gone. I pulled everything out and laid it across the floor like puzzle pieces, each one a sliver of a life lived mostly in silence. Emily found me there an hour later. She didn't say anything at first, just stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her brows drawn in quiet concern. Then she stepped inside, knelt beside me, and picked up one of the letters. "What is all this?" she asked. "Everything I never wanted to see again," I replied, but I didn't stop her when she sat beside me and started to read. We spent the afternoon cataloging. She opened a spreadsheet on her laptop. I dictated dates, names, memories. She sorted documents into folders. She read each letter like an archivist, not a daughter, detached but protective. "This isn't just family history," she said at one point. "This is a record of generational damage." And it was. Nathan's letters revealed the quiet panic behind his authority, ramblings about order, discipline, and being a man of structure. He feared chaos. He equated emotion with weakness. He wrote about his father's rage like it was both warning and inheritance. My own journal entries, scattered between tax forms and deeds, were like whispers I'd forgotten how to hear. I read one aloud. Ethan mimicked Nathan's tone again today. I asked him not to. He smirked. I think he enjoys it. Emily looked up at me, her voice tight. "You wrote that when he was 12. I nodded. That night we began drafting the outline for something bigger. At first it was just an idea, a memoir maybe, or a collection of essays, a way to give shape to the chaos. But the more we sifted through the truth, the more we realized we weren't just unpacking my life. We were building a blueprint, a warning, a torch in the dark. "It shouldn't die in this house," Emily said. "Your story, his shadow, what we saw, what we survived, it needs air." I knew she was right, not because I wanted attention, not because I needed justice in the eyes of strangers, but because silence was the first inheritance I ever received, and I was done passing it on. One folder held a collection of my mother's old letters, ones I'd forgotten I even had, folded into crisp thirds, tucked away like they were afraid of the light. In them, her voice was formal, cold, updates about the weather, notes on her bridge club, not a single sentence about how I was doing or if I was okay. That, too, was part of the story. I wrote a header on the timeline, "The Legacy of Distance." Underneath, we began to mark it, one generation at a time. My mother's silence, my father's rigidity, Nathan's detachment, Ethan's superiority, and somewhere in there, me, the ghost moving through it all, trying to keep the house warm without ever asking why it was so cold to begin with. Emily found a photograph buried deep in one of the boxes. It was me, younger, in my mid-20s, holding baby Ethan on a beach in Cannon Beach. Wind in my hair, salt on my skin, and a look on my face I couldn't quite place. "You look happy," she said. "I wasn't," I answered. We burned it later, not out of spite, but because it was a lie, a performance frozen in time. We stayed up late that night, surrounded by pages and files and memories. Emily brought out tea. I held one of Nathan's old notebooks in my lap, the pages dense with his looping handwriting, thoughts he never shared with me, but kept preserved like artifacts of a man he only wanted to be on paper. "I thought I was crazy," I whispered at one point. For a long time, I really believed I was the problem. Emily looked at me then, not with pity, but something stronger. "You weren't crazy. You were unheard." She reached for my hand. "Let's make them hear you now." That was when it clicked. The will? It wasn't the statement. This was. This archive. This record. This chronicle of survival and unraveling and rebuilding. I had spent so long equating legacy with money, with houses and jewelry and policy documents. But legacy was truth. It was the story people told after you were gone. What they whispered in kitchens, what they passed on in quiet moments, what your daughter would say to her daughter, and mine would say, "She didn't stay silent, not in the end." As we packed up the last of the documents that night, I looked at the safe, now empty except for the new will, and realized I wasn't afraid anymore. The truth was out, and it wasn't leaving. Emily walked with me to the door of the office, glanced back once, then flicked off the light. The room went dark, but the story, our story, was just beginning to glow. The hardest truth I've ever spoken wasn't about Ethan or Nathan. It was about myself. Good mothers lie too, not always to deceive, but to survive, to maintain peace, to preserve the illusion that love still lived where only fear remained. I lied more than I ever realized. I lied when I said Nathan was just tired after a long day. I lied when I smiled through bruised feelings at dinner parties. I lied when I told the kids their father was just strict, not cruel. I lied every time I said I was fine, and each lie, no matter how small, cemented the foundation Ethan would build his own detachment on. The flashbacks come sharper now. One in particular won't let go. A Saturday morning, Ethan was 6, Emily still in diapers. Nathan was slamming cabinet doors. The coffee wasn't made. I had forgotten to pick up his dry cleaning. He raised his voice, loud and biting, not physical, but loud enough to make Ethan flinch and Emily cry. Later that day, at a neighbor's barbecue, I laughed as I told a friend how Nathan needs his morning caffeine or he falls apart. Everyone chuckled. I smiled, wide and bright, like a hostage blinking in Morse code. Last week, I met with Angela. We hadn't seen each other in over a decade. She was my childhood friend, the one who sat next to me in 3rd grade, who braided my hair at sleepovers, who called me every week until Ethan turned 10 and I stopped answering. We met at a small cafe, neutral ground. She hugged me longer than expected. Over coffee, she didn't ask about Nathan. She didn't ask about Ethan. She asked about me. "You disappeared, Claire," she said gently, and we all thought we knew why. I didn't say anything. "We all knew what Nathan was like," she added. "We just thought you'd leave." I looked down at my coffee cup. I thought I would too. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at a blank page in my journal. Why did I stay? I wrote the question again and again until the ink blurred under my hand. There wasn't one answer. There were 100. Because I was afraid. Because I didn't know where to go. Because no one told me I could. Because silence was safer than conflict. Because I believed leaving made me a bad mother. Because if I told the truth out loud, I'd have to live with it. But shame only grows in silence, and silence was killing me slowly. So I made a choice. I reached out to the director of the local women's shelter. I told her I wanted to speak, not just to donate, not just to volunteer. I wanted to stand in front of people and name what I'd lived through. The fear that gripped me the moment I hit send was unlike anything I'd felt before. But so was the relief. The event was small, 20 or 30 women, some older, some younger, some with children clinging to their sides. I wore navy blue, simple, clean. When I stepped up to the podium, my hands trembled. Not because I doubted my story, but because I knew how many women in that room were still living it. I used to believe good mothers stay silent, I began, that love means covering, not confronting. I told them about Nathan, about Ethan, about the lies that look like protection but act like poison. I kept my family intact, I said, but I fractured myself doing it. Afterward, several women hugged me. One whispered, "You just told my story." It was the first time I felt like my pain had purpose. Emily was there, sitting in the back, her eyes glassy but proud. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was everything I never had from my own mother. But peace never comes without interruption. A week later, I received a letter from Ethan's attorney, a legal objection. He was contesting the will, the claim, coercion, mental instability, that I was no longer of sound mind and had been manipulated by outside influences, meaning Emily. I read the letter in full, twice. My pulse didn't spike, my hands didn't shake. Instead, I laughed, a low, bitter sound that echoed in the hallway like defiance. Even now, Ethan was trying to control the story, to reassert the narrative where he was the wronged son, and I was the unstable mother clinging to delusion. I showed the letter to Emily. She skimmed it, then looked at me. "We fight this, right?" "No," I said. She blinked. "No? We don't fight him. We fight the idea of him, the idea that what he says can still control us." She didn't understand at first, but later that night, as we worked on the manuscript of the memoir we'd been building from the safe's contents, she said, "Then we make this bigger." And we did. I submitted the revised will, along with a notarized psychological evaluation from my therapist, confirming my mental clarity and emotional intention. We added letters of support from friends, my doctor, even the shelter's director. But more than that, we made noise. Emily posted the recording. We published an essay in a local magazine. We spoke, together, at another event. We didn't just answer his legal challenge, we buried it in truth. Good mothers lie, but brave mothers unlearn it. And that's what I was now. Not perfect, not healed, but brave enough to tell the truth out loud, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. Because silence might have protected my image. But truth? Truth was going to save my soul. I never imagined I'd be in a courtroom at 63, defending my sanity from my own child. The room was colder than I expected. Institutional beige walls, two bright lights, and the scent of freshly printed paper. My shoes clicked softly against the tile as I entered, each step feeling too loud for what lay ahead. Ethan sat on the other side of the courtroom, flanked by his lawyer. He didn't look at me. His posture was perfect, his jaw set. That same faint smirk that had followed me through decades of dinner tables and dismissals was there, only now it wore a tie and legal validation. Emily squeezed my hand before sitting behind me. She looked like armor. The opposing counsel stood first. "Your Honor, this case isn't about inheritance. It's about clarity, mental stability, coercion, a grieving widow under undue influence, led by her emotionally involved daughter to rewrite her estate out of bitterness." Bitterness. That word rang in my ears. I wasn't bitter. I was done. My lawyer was patient, steady. She presented the revised will, the timeline of decisions, my journal entries, Ruth's evaluation, and a chronological breakdown of how the changes had evolved, not in haste, but through years of reflection. Still, the defense pounced. They called my capacity into question. They referenced my therapy, my journal entries during periods of depression, my late-night emails to Emily discussing pain, regret, anger. She was unstable, the attorney said with a measured tone, addressing the judge. She expressed suicidal ideation in her writing. She referred to herself as a ghost. Her emotional decisions should not dictate financial outcomes. I sat frozen. I had used those words. I had felt that low. But that didn't mean I was incapable of truth. Then came Emily. She wore navy, like I had at the shelter. She stood with her chin high and voice trembling only once. "My mother is the clearest-minded person I know," she said. "She made this decision not because she hates my brother, but because she finally understood she was worth more than how he treated her." The attorney tried to trip her up. "Did you encourage your mother to change the will?" I encouraged her to choose herself. And you benefit financially from this new version? Yes, and I would still defend her even if I didn't. Her voice didn't shake again. Next came Ruth, my therapist. She laid the foundation of my journey, from internalized trauma to deliberate clarity. She is not unstable, Ruth said. She is a survivor of long-term psychological abuse and emotional neglect. Her actions are consistent with someone finally drawing boundaries. She spoke clinically but with warmth. She spoke truth. Still, I could feel the room's eyes on me like heat, judging, dissecting, wondering if I was just another bitter woman trying to punish her son. I had prepared myself for that, but I hadn't prepared for the flashbacks. As I took the stand and the opposing lawyer began her questions, my mind didn't stay in the room. It slipped. To Ethan, age 11, calling me stupid when I suggested he say thank you. To Nathan, sitting silently while it happened. To the dinner table, years ago, where my voice cracked under the weight of being ignored. To the morning I held Emily after she found me crying in the laundry room, her tiny hand patting my shoulder, asking if I needed a Band-Aid. The courtroom faded for a second. Then I blinked, and I was back. Mrs. Delaney, the lawyer said, can you explain why you waited so long to make these changes? I steadied myself, because I believed I had no right to choose myself. Is it possible that your daughter manipulated your grief? No, I said. She witnessed it. You wrote in your journal that you felt lost. I was, and then I found myself again. That's what this is. The judge was quiet, listening, not emotive. I didn't know what he was thinking, but I knew what I believed. And that would have to be enough. Then something unexpected. A new witness approached the bench. Angela, my childhood friend, I didn't know she was coming. I've known Claire for over 40 years, she said. We lost touch, yes, but I knew her before Nathan. I saw the light leave her, and I saw her choose to find it again. The judge asked why she was there. Because silence is how abuse survives. I thought she should have someone who saw the before. I exhaled. She had been there at the beginning, and now she stood with me in the end. My closing testimony was brief. I stood and looked at Ethan. I am not punishing you, I said. I am releasing myself. He didn't blink, his arms crossed tighter. I loved you, I still do, but I cannot reward cruelty. I will not validate entitlement. Then I turned to the judge. This will is not an act of anger. It's the only honest act I've made in decades. And I sat down. When the court adjourned for the day, Emily walked beside me in silence. The hallway echoed with footsteps, murmurs, the shuffling of lawyers and witnesses. I felt exhausted, but I was not empty. I had not wavered, not once. The trial was still ongoing, but my truth had already been spoken. The courtroom was still as the judge read the verdict. His voice was even, clinical, devoid of ceremony, yet every word landed like thunder in my chest. The court finds no sufficient evidence of coercion or mental instability. The revised will shall stand. It took a moment for the meaning to settle in. Ethan would receive nothing. No house, no savings, no inheritance. Just the silence he had so often weaponized, now returned to him in full. He didn't shout. That would have been too honest. Instead, he stood, slowly, calculated, and smoothed the lapels of his suit. The same way Nathan used to adjust his tie before delivering disappointment. His jaw clenched. His eyes met mine for the first time in weeks. Cold, flat, still. You'll regret this, he said. Then he turned and walked out, the echo of his footsteps trailing behind him like a warning that never came. The courtroom door clicked shut with the same sound I remembered from the kitchen 20 years ago, when I tried to offer Ethan advice and he rolled his eyes and walked away. But this time, he was the one dismissed. I sat there a while, unable to move. The room emptied slowly, lawyers, court staff, strangers. Emily waited beside me, her hand resting lightly on my back. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just exhaled. For the first time in what felt like my entire adult life, I wasn't holding my breath. Back at home, the air smelled like lemon and dust, old comfort. The curtains swayed gently in the early afternoon breeze. Emily brewed tea, humming softly in the kitchen. I wandered to the window. Outside, birds moved in a lazy arc across the yard, bright, winged, unaware. There was something holy about it. I slid open the window. The screen had been removed weeks ago, left leaning against the wall during spring cleaning. Wind brushed my face, no barrier between me and the day. I sat in the armchair beside it, the fabric worn in all the right places, the light falling across my hands, and then I collapsed, not in pain, in peace. My body folded in on itself, shoulders shaking not from sorrow, but from the release of it, a whole life's weight falling off in silence. Emily didn't say a word when she found me there. She knelt beside the chair, wrapped her arms around me. I leaned into her, the kind of lean that doesn't ask for support, but finally allows it. No tears, no speeches, just breathe. Her embrace said what no one else ever had. You're safe now. Later that evening, we sat on the porch. The sky turned pale pink. Hummingbirds flickered near the feeder. The house behind us was still, quiet, but not in the way it used to be. Not in fear, in calm. I had imagined this moment before, but it had always felt like fiction. Now it was real. I was free. Then came the stranger. He walked up the stone path just as dusk began to settle. Tall, lean, older than Nathan had been when he passed. He wore a brown corduroy jacket, wrinkled but clean. His steps were measured, his expression unreadable. Emily stood, instinctively protective. "Can we help you?" He removed his cap. "My name is Thomas Delaney," he said. "I'm Nathan's brother." The world stilled. I stood, slow and wary. Nathan didn't have a brother. "He did," Thomas said. "We were estranged for over 40 years. He never spoke of me and I didn't ask him to." Emily and I exchanged a glance. "Why are you here now?" I asked. He hesitated, then, "I read the trial in the local paper. Saw your name. I had to come." We invited him in. The house felt suddenly fragile, like a history book someone else had begun to annotate. Thomas carried a small envelope. Inside it, a photo of two boys no older than 10. One was Nathan, unmistakably. The other, I now knew, was Thomas. "We were raised by a monster," he said, voice steady. "Nathan escaped by becoming the thing he feared." He looked at me. "I imagine you know what that means better than anyone." I nodded. He reached into his coat and pulled out another letter, yellowed, sealed. "He wrote this to me years ago. I never read it. Didn't want to hear excuses, but maybe you should." He left it on the coffee table and stood to go. As he reached the door, he paused. "I don't want anything from you. No connection, no reconciliation. I just thought you deserved to know. He wasn't always the man you knew, but he chose to become him." When he left, Emily sat beside me. We stared at the envelope. I didn't open it. Not yet. Some truths arrive when they're ready. But I knew in that moment that everything I'd lived, the lies, the silence, the unraveling, was only half the story. The rest was still being written. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Weeds clung to the broken fence, paint peeled from the front door in curling strips, and ivy threaded through the sagging porch rail like veins beneath tired skin. My childhood home stood quiet, less a house now, more a shell. Still, it pulled me in. Emily waited in the car, sensing I needed this part alone. I stepped out onto the gravel, boots crunching softly, and stared at the place where it all began. The door creaked open with little resistance. Inside, the air was stale, wood rot, dust, and something else. Memory. The wallpaper in the entry hall had faded to a colorless blur. In the corners, the same floral patterns I had traced with my fingers, as a girl still clung to the plaster. I walked the halls slowly, the living room, the edge of the fireplace I once split my lip on when I was 4, the kitchen, where my mother sliced oranges with precision, never affection, where my father read the paper without looking up when I entered the room. I stood in the doorway for a long time, trying to find warmth in those walls, but none came. The upstairs creaked beneath my weight. Each step groaned as though it, too, carried memories too heavy to hold. My old bedroom, the same pale blue paint, faded but there, the windowsill where I once watched thunderstorms with a flashlight clutched in my hand, the closet door that stuck at the corner, the floorboard that always creaked when I snuck out to the hallway to listen for kindness that never came. I sat on the edge of the bed frame, no mattress now, just the frame, and spoke softly. "I'm here," I said. "I made it." I wasn't talking to the walls or the air, I was talking to the girl I used to be. In the backyard, I found the spot near the fence line where the lilacs used to bloom. I dug with my hands at first, the soil brittle, reluctant. Then Emily came around the side of the house, a shovel in one hand and a sapling in the other. "I figured you'd need help," she said. We didn't speak much as we worked. We dug a hole just deep enough, set the young tree in, packed the dirt around its roots. It was a red maple, vibrant, resilient, the kind of tree that knows how to hold fire and still stand tall. Later that evening, I stood at the edge of the yard and read the letter aloud. It wasn't for anyone else, just for her. The woman I used to be, the mother I became, the ghost I lived with. "Dear Claire," I began, "you did what you thought you had to. You stayed when you wanted to leave. You believed the lies because they were easier to hold than the truth. You loved people who could not love you back the way you deserved." I paused. "But you endured. You endured and you gave and you hoped. And though it cost you nearly everything, you never gave up on something better." My voice trembled. "You are not the mistakes you made to survive. You are the courage it took to finally stop surviving and start living." I folded the letter, tucked it into the soil near the roots of the tree, and stepped back. The wind picked up slightly, brushing my hair across my cheeks like a caress. I imagined her there, young me, watching with wide eyes, and I smiled. The months that followed moved in a blur, like the world spinning into place. Emily and I finished the manuscript, 15 chapters of pain, survival, and reclamation. We titled it The Weight of Quiet. It was part memoir, part reckoning. We submitted it to 3 small publishers. 2 passed. The third said yes. The first reading was at a community center. 10 folding chairs, most filled. A coffee urn in the corner. A woman in the back row cried the entire time. The second reading was at a women's college. Afterward, a student approached us. She couldn't have been older than 21. "My mom's going through this right now," she said. "I didn't understand her until tonight." We partnered with local shelters, held workshops on recognizing emotional abuse, hosted story circles where women could speak their truths aloud, some for the first time in their lives. Each event chipped away at the shame that had kept us bound. Each testimony added to a chorus that refused to be silenced again. One afternoon, after a particularly emotional session, Emily turned to me and said, "Do you ever regret telling the truth?" I thought about it. The court, the conflict. Ethan's eyes as he walked away, the way my voice sometimes still shook when I spoke to crowds. "No," I said, "because the truth didn't just save me." I looked at her. "It gave you back to me." The tree we planted grew fast. Each time we visited the old house, now slated for demolition, we watered it. We trimmed it. We sat under it. One day, a woman who lived nearby brought her daughter to see it. "She calls it the fire tree," she told us, "because of the leaves." I smiled. That's exactly what it was. Born from ash, holding light. The auditorium wasn't large, just 60 chairs, a modest podium, and a single vase of marigolds on a folding table. The kind of room that held sincerity better than spectacle. People filtered in slowly, the way they do when the air already feels thick with something unspoken. I stood off to the side, watching them fill the rows. Some held copies of the book. Others came empty-handed, faces drawn with recognition, like they'd been waiting for someone to tell their story too. Emily adjusted the mic and nodded toward the front row. "You ready?" I was, not because I had practiced enough, not because the nerves were gone, but because I had lived every word I was about to say. The reading began. I stood behind the podium, palms flat on either side, the book open in front of me. I read from chapter 13, the one I almost didn't write, the one where I admitted to the silence I passed down like a family heirloom, the one where I said Ethan's name out loud. I didn't tremble. My voice was the first thing I gave up, I read, and the last thing I reclaimed. Eyes in the crowd blinked back tears. Some nodded, some closed their eyes like they needed to breathe the words in slowly. And near the back, one seat remained empty, reserved. A small placard read simply, "Ethan." He had been invited. Not because I expected him to come, but because I needed the space to confront the hope I'd carried too long. He didn't come. Of course he didn't. And in that absence, something uncurled inside me. Not bitterness, not relief, just release. After the reading, there was applause. Not thunderous, but honest. Women came up to hug me. Strangers pressed my hands. One woman whispered, "Thank you for not making him the villain." That made it real. I smiled. And for once, it didn't feel like armor. It felt like arrival. Later that night, back at home, the house settled into its nighttime rhythm. Emily brewed tea. I changed into my robe. We sat together in the quiet, watching the wind through the window as it played with the leaves of the maple tree across the yard. Its branches grown wide, its roots deep. Then the phone rang. Unknown number. I didn't move to answer it. But Emily did. Checked the screen, turned it toward me. Ethan's number. I stared at it. I let it ring. But then the voicemail icon popped up, and without hesitation, I clicked play. His voice was low, careful. "Hey, Mom. I just heard about the event, about the book. I guess I should have seen it coming." I waited, but then his tone shifted. "I don't know why you're dragging all this into the public eye. You always made things bigger than they were." And there it was. The same old refrain, no remorse, just revision. I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry, I guess, for some things, but you didn't have to cut me out like that." That was as far as I got. I deleted the message. Not in anger, not in sadness, just necessity. Some things don't need closure. They need distance. Some stories don't need apologies. They need endings. I walked upstairs that night barefoot, the floor cool against my soles. In my room, I stood before the mirror. No ring, no mask, just me. Hair graying, eyes softened, lines on my face that didn't ask for forgiveness. I looked at my reflection and I said, "I gave life, I gave chances, but I won't give myself away again." And I meant it. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds, washing the house in light. Emily brought breakfast to the porch. We sat beneath the eaves, the smell of coffee and pine in the air. She reached over, took my hand. "You were brave," she said. I smiled. "I stayed," I replied. "But then I didn't." She nodded. And we watched the red maple sway, its branches full, its roots unshaken, just like me. If this story stirred something buried deep, you're not alone. Every family has its silence. Every silence has its cost. What would you do if the person you raised became the person who broke you? Stick around. We're just beginning to unearth what others spend a lifetime hiding. Because truth doesn't whisper, it demands to be heard.